how way, ay, 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 ay. How way up, how way out, ay, 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 ay. How way, ay, 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 how way, ay, 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 ay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host, Kira Young, and you've reached me on Revolution Radio. We are live streaming with Real Liberty Media, as usual, and I thank everybody for listening. I have two really fantastic guests that I'm really excited to talk to tonight. I do have a message as well from Zephyr Elise. Today's action was very, very difficult, and I just want to read her statement that she asked me to read. And it is as follows. Today, October 22nd, as always, we met as a camp for sunrise ceremony, prayers, and sacred songs. We left to go show support to relatives who had left earlier than we did to put their bodies on the line to shut down construction of this destructive pipeline. We walked close to ancestral burial sites and offered tobacco that our presence wouldn't disturb them from any further from their rest than they had already been disturbed by the construction. Songs were sung as the women led the 2-mile march to the work site. The hill was steep and our group got separated. One main body of about 100 continued forward to try to reach the work site. Another 30 of us couldn't make the descent and crossing. Our small group was met with armored police vehicles, officers with long-range rifles and automatic rifles. We held the road at the crossing. Many sang sacred songs, others lit sage and smudge, not knowing what else to do. I fell to my knees in front of 13 officers and prayed for the water that is being threatened, for the four-leggeds, the feathered, the finned, the crawling nations, all of us that are being threatened. I prayed to my ancestors, the ancestors and spirits of the lands for help, guidance, wisdom, protection. When I was finished praying, I climbed the hill only to see our relatives being gassed and about 50 defenders rounded up and arrested. The rest of the group retreated towards us. We were told we could return the way we came, but the police made a charge at those in the back that could not run or walk fast. More were taken. Our elders, children, and those alternately able were injured and were threatened. Many were rescued by trucks who came to pick up those in the rear and carry them to safety. Many more had to run over a mile. My uncle, Oompa Noompa, was one who ran, a man who's terminally ill and diabetic. He made sure the elders and children were safe and refused transport. He is a man who helped our group find the courage to resist when many were unsure. He is not alone out here. Many stayed in camp to pray and watch for our return. Many are still in camp praying for those who were taken. Many a Nipi sweat lodge will be held tonight to keep our spirits strong. Many grandmothers are cooking nonstop today in the various community kitchens to feed our bodies and heal our spirits. Many youth will run and laugh today, reminding us why we fight and continue to do so to guard these lands and our sacred waters. Mini Wichoni is our rally cry, for it is a truth. Water is life. We survived our roughest day out here yet, together, standing together. We shall continue to stand strong for the waters, for the lands, for the next generations, for the ancestors. Please pray for us. It will only be getting more intense out here. Sending love, blessings, and prayers from the No Dapple Camp, Dakota Territories, Standing Rock. So I wanted to send her message. Today was really, really rough, and the North Dakota Morton County Sheriff's Office is attacking the water protectors who they know are unarmed. It's war, and it's an egregious abuse of power, and it's been going on a long time. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Denise Pictou Maloney. Are you there?
I am. Thank you, Kira.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. These images that are coming out of North Dakota remind me of, I think it was 2 years ago, it might have been as much as 3, where the Micmac faced off with Alton Gas, well, still facing off with them. But that iconic image of First Nations woman praying with her feather up against a line of police in riot gear emerged about this time. I think it was 2 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of those type of images are coming out of North Dakota now. And the battle continues.
Yeah, it's disturbing. It's disturbing to watch this unfold repeatedly over and over again. You know, our nations have fought so long to survive, and then to have their freedom compromised by big corporations coming in and poisoning our waters and our lands, so that all of that effort that we made to make it to today, you know, just gets snuffed out with a simple business deal or a simple phone call. You know, I don't understand. We're watching it from up here in the Northeast, and you know, we're not getting the whole story. As you know, it's not put out in the major media. I wasn't actually aware of what you just read about. I didn't know that happened today. This is the first time hearing about it. And of course, that's not ever put into any of our major media that's going on. And I'm glad there are people there reporting from the lines, because it keeps people engaged in from areas far away that, you know, it would be easy to forget that this is going on, because we're not getting the support from the major media.
Right.
So I'm glad to hear that people are still managing to get the word out. You know, it's not unlike any time that we make a stand. You know, it's always the effort of the courageous few that are willing to take that stand and make that sacrifice, that are the victims, and end up going and getting arrested and having to make bail. And you know, there's I want them to know that we're all thinking about them, and certainly trying to support them as much as we can from afar.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's the same formula over and over again. You know, women are going in there, putting their lives on the line, and you know, it's not a safe environment. You know, to basically exercise your right to protest and your basic right to defend your right to live in this land undisturbed.
Right. And the women that are out there are tired of the dumping ground that is their home for the government and their corporations. And the women that are there know that we've been politely asking for green energy for 40 years, and we're not going to politely ask anymore.
No.
We're done. We're just done.
Yeah. We're not being heard. And I don't think people realize, you know, we talk a lot in the Northeast about treaty, because we have an active treaty that's still being exercised and used. And we've actually just recently, and I don't know if you guys are hearing about it down there, we're fighting for water rights and protecting our waterway very close to my community in Sibibinagady, in what we used to call Indian Brook, which is Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia. And there was a group, Alton Gas, that wanted to come in and do some salt brining and do some build some caverns to store some natural gas, and you know, the caves have collapsed, and now we're kind of in a standstill trying to decide what is going to happen. You know, my impression is that if the environment and, you know, Mother Earth is not cooperating, I don't think they have too much to stand on. You know, we've got some warriors out there, some water warriors out there that have been nonstop on site, protecting and doing ceremony and making sure that, you know, the parties that are trying to take over and use this land that we've used traditionally through our treaties for generations, you know, going back thousands of years, we use that waterway for our sustenance to survive. So, you know, it's interesting to see when things don't go their way, you know, and I fear, as we all know, they'll just get up and go find another place, right? So as much as we like to revel in the fact that things are not going their way, we do know that it's an ongoing fight that just, you know, will not stop. They just, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that it doesn't come to the point where people have to start, you know, losing their freedom and losing their rights to exist peacefully in those communities.
Yeah, it's one of the really disturbing things to see is their constitutional rights are being violated, their civil rights are being violated. People are getting strip searched. The chairman of Standing Rock got strip searched. This is an egregious abuse of power. The actress Shailene Woodley, she opened up about it. She was strip searched as well. So they're obviously trying to intimidate, and they're intimidating and arresting any type of media that comes in there. To say, remain invisible.
Exactly, and that's their attempt to try and dehumanize, right? That's been a classic tactic all along with our First Nations people across this continent, that, you know, anytime that they in any way tried to exert their rights or stand up, then there was an opportunity that presented themselves for the authorities to dehumanize and continue that systemic genocide that they started, you know, a century ago on our nations, and it's sad to see, and I hope that they all know that those at the front line know that we're standing strong, that we're praying for them, and that we're you know, definitely hoping for a positive and a safe conclusion to this. I don't know what to say, because, you know, we just heard the ruling the other day. You know, it goes back and forth every second day. You hear a different story. And it seems to go, you know, 2 steps forward and then 1 step back.
Right.
I know we had spoken before about my mother's participation, you know, at another time when they had to make a stand. And she's always been very passionate about our land and survival and making sure that we protect our rights and protect our waters and our lands, because we're so deeply connected to it.
Right. And for those listeners who don't know who your mother was, her name was Mae Pictou Aquash, and she was one of the powerhouse members of AIM back in the 70s. So I invited you to talk about how this eco-justice, this fight for eco-justice, is one big fight. It's a fight for all of us, for all of our rights. So we can fight all of these battles that we face. Some of the people say to us, well, you know, you should just try one thing at a time. And it's like, no, it's all part of the same trap that we're in. The violence, you know, that we're facing inside our communities and from outside our communities. We can't just fight the violence coming from outside. We have to address the violence coming from inside as well, or we're not going to be safe.
That's right. Yeah. It's all connected. You know, had my mother survived and made it to the ripe old age, you know, of today, she would have been there defending the land. She would have been on the banks of the Stewiacke River, protesting and making sure that the land was defended and the waters were protected, because she was very, very adamant that the success of our survival had to do with the protection of our earth. And, you know, we see a lot of people that don't necessarily have that same connection, that would consider taking, you know, the deals that the oil companies are offering, because we're in survival mode. You know, we have suffered horrific attempts at snuffing us out, and people are tired. They're tired of fighting. You know, and I'm trying to. It's hard to reason with people who are in survival mode to make the right moral choice and the right carry strong moral ethics, because you know, when you're surrounded by so much poison and so much negativity, and you're consistently beaten down, it's hard not to succumb to that. And I don't ever blame anyone that has gone that path, because I know that they've suffered. You know, the decisions with you try to do what you can with what you have, and you know, I know communities can become divided over situations like this. They can decide, well, you know, the oil companies are coming in, so they're going to offer us money and jobs and security, and you know, and then you have your grassroots people that are like, well, it's going to poison our area, and yeah, the jobs are going to be for 10 years, and then they're going to be gone. We're going to left with the toxicity that's behind after that. You know, and it's hard to maintain a level head in all of that, because you do have to deal with a lot of the violence and the negativity and the lateral violence in our communities that exists because of this whole acquisition of our resources that still continues. And that's what it's always been about. It's always been about taking and not consulting, and taking and not giving. So, you know, and that creates a dynamic within our own communities where, you know, and to their benefit, obviously, it works to their benefit that we are, you know, concerned with people's safety when they go to events like this, and concerned with our own moral code being compromised when you're dealing with such big entities like the oil companies. Right.
And along those same lines, I would take issue with the folks who criticize the water protectors and say, well, I bet they drove a car with gas to there. Yeah, what other choice did they have?
Exactly.
You know, like we're living, like the water protectives live in an alternate universe or something where they can just choose whatever, you know, means of transportation they want. Like they've set up the whole system themselves, you know. I mean, that's
tell you,
crazy.
I'll tell you, care has to really be taken. You know, whenever you're having events on like this, you're going to have all kinds of people that are going to be judging, making comments. And I think that the opportunity is taken whenever you have, you know, and whether it be one person or a small group of people that tend to not necessarily want to follow what the community wants to happen during these protests, and they kind of go and do their own thing, and, you know, for whatever reasons, their own cause, their own grandstanding, I'll just say it, grandstanding, and then that gives, you know, the outsiders an opportunity to start saying, well, see, we told you that, you know, you guys said you're going to be peaceful, and here you have people, you know, that aren't behaving in such a peaceful way. And then that causes a lot of dissension within the community when they're trying to fight the common cause. And it's really hard and difficult to stay aligned and stay on course because, you know, we do have that that negativity in our communities that, you know, and that's what took my mother's life. Right. You know, she was there doing they were all fighting for the same thing. You know, she was, the whole idea of the American Indian movement was to fight for our rights. But there was a handful of people that decided to start playing God and take the lives of other human beings. And that's not what my mother signed up for, you know. And I'm really proud of the Standing Rock tribe in standing their course and staying their course, you know, morally and ethically, and making sure that, you know, the group as a collective doesn't get too distracted with some of the drama that can happen with these events, with people that show up that are there for other reasons. And, you know, and I think the message strongly has to be put out there that, a few people that have lost their way, that are doing their own thing, does not determine what everybody else's goal is. And, and that's important because it's a very real possibility that people would lose interest in if that wasn't defined, because I certainly would never support the people that murdered my mother in any way if they were trying to grandstand and take the opportunity to do their own thing when it comes to protecting our land, because I don't believe that they have that capability, and that they're not genuine because they can't even address the taking of one of their own women. Mm-hmm. So, but rising above that and getting the message out to the rest of the population that that's not what our fight is about, and understanding that the greater good of the populations that are involved in these protests are wanting to save our planet, wanting to save our water, and making sure that we have resources so that we can continue on for another 1,000 years. Right.
And it takes a tremendous amount of self-control to maintain your commitment to nonviolence in the face of the violence that they're facing from the police right now. It takes a tremendous self-control. And so I also am very proud of them for their commitment to nonviolence. And it really represents an evolution in our movement, because that's where we went wrong before, was not maintaining a commitment to nonviolence. And it's really the only way. And even though our protectors feel defeated today, the world will see this. I will work like hell to get this out, what they're doing. And I'll make it there somehow. I don't know how, but I've already told them I'm coming.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And I like I said, I when I first heard about what was going on down there, we had been struggling with the Alton gas here for a while, but it was mostly a battle on paper. It wasn't an actual protest until after, I believe, in and around the same time that Standing Rock launched their protest. We had some people go down and basically claim our land back. And in Nova Scotia, in the Northeast, like I said, we do have our treaties, and more notably the Treaty of 1752, which is our peace and friendship treaty, which provides us with hunting and fishing rights as long as we exist as a nation. And I think that in Canada, and maybe even North America, Nova Scotia and the Maritimes, the Mi'kmaq territory, are one of the few last remaining unceded territories in the continent. We never gave up our land, and that is noted and stated in our treaties, that the use of the land that we allowed in signing the treaties was basically for the colonizers and the settlers to use the land in exchange for our right to fish and hunt as we saw necessary for our sustainability, and also to have our education, our health, and our dental looked after, and our medical medicines. So, those are all very powerful, active treaties that we use here in the Northeast. That, but even still, as we're trying to defend and resurrect that treaty to the point where, it's taken seriously by the public, we still have issue, with big gas companies coming in and just plopping down and thinking that they can just wave some money around and have access to lands that we've held for thousands of years, for 13,000 years. And we've used that land, and to the idea of poisoning our river so that our fish die, so that we don't have that sustainability. If this was back 100 years ago, our whole community would perish because of that. So, it's pretty serious stuff, and I'm hoping more and more non-Indigenous people get involved in this. I've I've spoken to my friends who are non-Indigenous about these issues. They're all on board, but I've got a handful of friends. The message, though, has to be almost like a spider web. It has to get out there that it is not just necessarily affecting us. It's affecting us all. We are, in fact, all treaty people. As long as you are residing on this continent, and specifically in the Northeast here, you are a treaty person because your ancestors made this decision to go into an agreement of peace and friendship, and to make sure that there was an exchange for the use of the land. And there's something a family member once told me that was really ironic. They said, if the government ever had to actually pay for the resources that they've taken out of the land that they stole, it would be in the trillions of dollars. Mm-hmm. So, the fact that people are trying to defend a little plot of land should not be a big concern, considered with the debt that's owed, to the First Nations people of this continent.
Yeah, and perhaps people who think that the First Nations people are living off the government. No, all of you are living off First Nations people.
Exactly.
It's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
And that the monies that that come from the government, that's rent, and like you said, it's nowhere near what's owed.
Yeah, exactly, and it's nowhere near what the national standard is for, payment that's coming from the government for non-Indigenous nations. Our welfare is well below the poverty level, the standard for the rest of the national payments that they receive. So, and of course, then we can get into a whole conversation about the conditions of our communities in being below the poverty level and not having potable water, having to boil water, and I mean, that's fine if you're camping and if you're going to a camp and there's a well and you got to boil the water, but this is people's everyday life. Yeah. To have to boil water to brush your teeth. People, this is not the 1900s. We're in 2016, and that is just unacceptable to have that condition in an area that is supposed to be governed by the government. That we are wards of the government in those communities. It's their responsibility. That's like having slumlords, for landlords. That they're not even going to provide you with clean running water and housing that's safe, and that's the only connection I can make. Is it's the exact same thing as having a slumlord for a landlord. Yeah, it's horrifying, and and the people are desperate. The people feel defeated. It's a horrible situation that everybody needs to say no. We're not no. This is not acceptable. Not just First Nations people, not just Indigenous people, and anybody out there non-Indigenous who feels the calling to help out. Our little tagline here at Revolution Radio is, Revolution Radio, throwing ourselves on the gears of the machine. Well, these people are doing that for real, and if you're serious about wanting things to change, then get your body out there and throw it on the gears of the machine. Because they need you desperately out there right now. And they need the support, and people have to share the information. And that's the thing, is that we, like I said earlier, we tend to get distracted with our everyday lives and, out of sight, out of mind. But I think the more people are engaged in discussing it and talking about it, and there tends to be a sense that you're not really able to help, but they don't realize how much you educate people by talking about it. And then they educate someone else. And then the numbers, eventually will grow where people will say, well, you know what, this is just unacceptable. We're just going to have to do something about it. And you're going to have literally a revolution on your hand where people are going to, as a society, decide that this is no longer acceptable to treat human beings in this way. How they could justify what happened today does not make any sense to me. it doesn't even register with me and how that could even be justified. Because, like I said, what we're hearing up here and what the reality is are two different things. I obviously have an in. I know what's really happening behind the scenes, but I know, for my everyday life, I look around. You would never know that this was going on, even with the one that's going on in our community with the AltaGas protest. You would not know that. Everybody just goes about their business, and they all expect to turn on that tap and have clean water coming out and have electricity and have all those things. And it's not about being so literal as people saying, well, how did they get there? Did they drive a car that had gas? But that's the same argument that people have said that, they want to return to our traditional ways. And, that's just not going to happen anymore with the world we're living in. Unless you're living in a teepee under a rock somewhere, we're all connected. We're all connected by the internet, by social media. We're connected to each other and talking and discussing things. And the power of voice and the power of your word has an incredible impact on getting people moving and making sure that people are aware and knowing that there is something that they can do. And that's to keep it current, keep talking about it, keep asking people about it. You go to a town hall meeting, ask your representative, what are we doing to protect our waterways? What are we going to do if this thing happens that's happening in North Dakota in our community? What's our plan? That's not to say that's just one spot. And that's not the first time it's happened, as you mentioned earlier. Right. This is something that's been going on for generations, where somebody will show up, and they've got the big bucks, and then they'll basically run the show. And, like I said, I'm really praying and hoping for a positive outcome. Certainly today's events don't necessarily indicate that it's a lost cause, but certainly, it clouds the view. Right. It clouds the view of the light on the other side of the tunnel. Certainly. And I don't know do you know what? I haven't gotten the latest updates on what their next court. Do they have any other options to?
Oh, they're going to keep plugging away. There's certainly appealing the decisions that have come down so far, and the ACLU is getting involved because the violation of rights is so egregious and so palpable. I mean, it's like. Well, I think it's really because their commitment to nonviolence, they just don't know how to react to it. So they're reacting to it. I mean, calling people who are praying rioters. Yeah. It's ridiculous on the face of it. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. And the world is seeing that. 40,000 people watching on social media, people praying. And then, the next day, the police saying we arrested those people for rioting, charging Amy Goodman for inciting a riot because she's covering a story. It's ridiculous on the face of it. And the longer it goes on, the less they're going to get away with it because it's received national attention now. And the judge refused to sign off on the riot charges against. So, freedom of the press is part of our Constitution. The right to peacefully assemble, the right to non-violently say no, to disobey, to not comply. That's a human right. To not comply with something that puts you and your family in danger is a human right. So that there will also be human rights people getting involved. And of course, Amnesty International has come as observers, but we have an issue with Amnesty International, don't we?
Yeah. Yes, we do. Well, like I said, this is where things get a little bit clouded and unclear with maintaining that moral code and that ethical code of making sure that, when you are getting engaged in fighting for our rights, that it stays genuine, that it stays justified. Because when you start clouding the area with supporting, and I'll give you a little bit of history, Amnesty International publicly campaigns regularly for clemency for Leonard Peltier. And if your listeners don't know, Leonard Peltier is complicit in the murder of my mother, Mae Pictou Aquash. He interrogated her at gunpoint, accused her of being an informant, and basically spearheaded the bad jacketing campaign that would eventually take her life at the hands of other AIM members. For years, our family sat in silence, waiting and hoping for someone to speak the truth, and we had to wait, sadly, for 28 years. That being said, Amnesty had come to his aid right away out of the gates when he was first arrested 40 years ago, and, took him on as their political martyr and political prisoner. And, my mom had us, right? And when we started campaigning, realizing that we were actually going to possibly get some convictions, I had Amnesty contact me in Canada to do a profile on my mom, because they wanted to feature her as one of the top 100 missing and murdered women in Canada. And they were just launching their missing and murdered women Indigenous women's campaign across as a national event. And I agreed, and I, knew that they were supporting Leonard. I had some conversations with them about that and said, at the time, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable, because I believed that it sent a mixed message. It sent a confusing, a conflicting, and a hypocritical message to our women, and specifically our families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, because here you have, an entity like Amnesty saying that they're fighting for the rights of human beings, yet they're supporting a man who was complicit, and at least complicit in her murder and in the knowledge of her murder, and participated in the cover-up of her murder for many years. And, when charges came, at the same time we were doing this interview process, when they charged John Graham, who they actually ended up later on trying and convicting for kidnapping, felony murder, for my mom's death, Amnesty wrote a letter of support for him. And wow. I had to take a step back and, and refocus and say, okay, wait a minute now. This is really not the path that I was hoping, in the image that I was hoping to campaign for my mother's justice with. These guys, riding next to me in the same vehicle towards, justice and finding some kind of, resolution to what happened to my mom. So I had some conversations with Amnesty, and, I said, this really, I don't feel comfortable with this, because I believe that people that know what happened to my mom's murder will use this as an opportunity to hide the truth. And I was right. I was told that everyone deserved a fair trial, and that we could not weigh in, or they would not weigh in until trials came about. So we had to wait. That was in 2004. And we had to wait 6 years, 2010, when John Graham went to trial and he was convicted. And I sent a letter to Amnesty, and I said, John's been charged and tried and convicted of felony murder. And, I didn't know what they were going to do with that information, but I told them those were the results of the trial, and I never heard anything back from them. And I took a step back from missing and murdered Indigenous women, because I did not want to send a mixed message to my mother's supporters and our family's supporters and other families out there that are hoping for justice and hoping for some little shred of advocacy, to have to deal with that contradiction, because it was a contradiction that was very painful for our family, because clearly we didn't have the opportunity to raise money.
Right.
Leonard Peltier has presented his conviction, has provided a whole host of opportunity for people to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And like I said, I would never accuse anyone of appropriating anyone else, because I don't know what their deal is or what their discussions or agreements were. But I know certainly the opportunity was taken with my mom, and I shut it down. So, and that to our detriment, because then that left us without advocacy or without any kind of support in vying for her justice, other than just our family and a handful of people, what I call true warriors, who gave up everything to participate and make sure. So, like I said, it's hard to maintain that straight and narrow, and it's hard to see through the smoke and mirrors. But I can't stress enough that if you are doing this out of your heart and it is pure, it is just, you know that it is truth, the truth you are seeking, and not personal gain, then you can't go wrong.
Right.
And, and it's easy to get distracted, but it's also not so easy to get back on that track again.
It's very difficult. And so disappointing, because you expect there to be these organizations that consider the truth. But it seems that they had already picked him as their poster boy, and they weren't going to change their mind regardless of the facts that were brought to their attention.
Yeah.
So that's really, really disappointing.
And that's too bad. You know what? It's too bad, because I feel bad for other families that are part of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's program, because people will say, well, this is a personal vendetta, this is just our family. No, this is the truth. This is what happened. This man was involved in hiding her murder for 28 years. There was a whole group of people that knew the truth, and they just lied. They lied to the public. They reinvented history. For them to stand there and say to my family members 40 years ago, when they went there for their funeral, for my mom's funeral, my two aunties flew down, for them to stand there and say the FBI shot her, when they knew that it was their own members that took her life. And, there's 4 trials to support that with the testimony of 23 witnesses. There's no feds in there saying that they kidnapped her. It's AIM people saying that. AIM people that are doing that testimony. And then the people will say, oh, well, they were forced to testify. And I'm like, forced to testify? You have to force someone to tell the truth? Clearly in that case, yeah, they did, because they were hell bent on taking that truth to their grave.
Mm-hmm.
And, several of them already have, gone off to the other side and have taken that truth to the grave with them. And, and that's their choice. And I'm sure that will be the choice of several others before, but the nice thing now is that the truth has been exposed. It's out there. People are learning the truth. They're being a little bit more critical of who they allow to advocate for them now. And that's the most important thing, is making sure that you know who you are allowing to advocate, know their history, know who they are, and then you will not be misled.
Right. And, I would even say the same of organizations like Democracy Now!, who take on the same sort of advocacy for Peltier, and do not listen to the facts, and do not, they should be held to the same standard as well, the same, to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever contacted them, but certainly.
I haven't bothered. I kind of, over the years, have learned that those that are truly interested in the truth, those that are really want to know, get to the bottom line and know the truth, would contact me. would contact our family. And I hate to say this, Karen, you know this because we've had conversations before. Very few people have contacted Annie Mae's immediate family. And the reason being is one of two things. Either they already had their mind up, so they've already done judge and jury themselves and have decided they've invested way too much time all this time investing in, supporting someone who clearly is guilty of other crimes other than just what they're sitting in prison for. And the second is that they just don't care. They don't care. All they worry about is selling their story, and they don't care what the truth is. They, our family, to the people that I've talked to who have bothered to address us and to say, you know what, I've talked to the AIM leadership, I've talked to this individual, now I'd like to hear, what happened with your family, what happened. And you can almost see the light bulbs going off when you're having the conversation, because the story is very similar. Yes, there was a revolution. Yes, there was dissension. Yes, there was corruption. And yes, the FBI and the government were, not behaving in a very reasonable and a very fair and very truthful way. That's right. Why my mother was there in the first place.
Right. And indigenous religion, native religions were still outlawed in this country at that time.
That's right.
So it was dangerous to practice Lakota religion.
Exactly. And my mother was there for a reason. She was there because the call was there. But what happened is when people started acting in a immoral and a corrupt way, in ways that she did not necessarily sign on for, she had a very strong moral code. And then when she started testing that and asking questions and protesting herself against the actions that they were partaking in, that's when things shifted. And, a handful of people were able to manipulate a whole organization, a whole group of individuals, because of the benefit of having all of that corruption surround them, all of the dissension surrounding them, inside and outside of the movement. They were able to convince other, for the most part, I'm sure were perfectly fine human beings, that it was perfectly okay to take a woman out and shoot her in the back of the head and call her a snitch. And that was justifiable in their minds. And, we're not talking about somebody jaywalking. We're talking about the taking of another human being's life. And this is where, I get upset with Amnesty, because, they say they fight for human rights, and my mother's rights were taken from her. And her right to life was taken from her unceremoniously. Leonard Peltier's still alive. May not be living the life he had hoped for, but then I'm sure that if he had a chance to do things over, well, mind you, he says he would do the same thing. Repeatedly, he said that. But the issue being that he lied about what happened to my mom, bragged to my mother about shooting the FBI agent while he begged for his life. And, we have documented testimony to that effect through the trials. But people don't bother looking up the information. They don't bother, finding out what's happening. And that leaves an opportunity for people to just invent their own things so that they can protect their own integrity. It's difficult to learn things aren't the way that you thought they were for a very long time. It's like losing your religion.
Yes.
For people, it's the fact that this could have happened. They have okayed for so many years because of the social injustice we've all been forced to live in. But as we now try to morally realign ourselves as First Nations and try to do things without getting violent, do things to protect our women and our children, those two worlds they contradict each other, because you can't have that attitude and then say that you're helping and trying to vie for the rights of our women and our children, when your hands are, stained red with the blood of one of those women.
Right.
It just doesn't present. It doesn't present a very trusting, a very trusting campaign. Like, to me, to have somebody say that, we fight for human rights, but here we're going to support this guy who we've supported for 40 years. And we're also going to support missing and murdered Indigenous women, but just negate the fact that this man you supported for 40 years is complicit in the murder of one of those missing and murdered women. How would you expect in any way for that family or those surviving members of that family to be able to say anything? That was a gag order in itself when it came to having the advocacy through Amnesty for our family. And, and we stepped back. Like I said, I stepped right back. They launched their campaign for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And, they used great big, 4-foot posters of my mother's image with the story underneath it, in vague point form, didn't necessarily say that the American Indian movement killed her, and they did that in a way that, still made it look like it was still socially okay to support that. And to support Leonard at the same time. But when you hear the facts, which they, at the time, because we hadn't gone to trial, and it may have been a little, now in hindsight, premature in making that decision to support my mother as their 100 missing and murdered Indigenous women, but, they had to save face. So, but you didn't see our family involved in too much after that with the Amnesty because, because of that background. And I still, like I said, to this day have not heard anything back from them. I reached out to them. I've emailed them. I've sent them emails and letters. And, and it's sad. It's sad that opportunity, to make things right was missed by them.
Right. And, that one of the main contributing factors to the situation is that the mainstream media doesn't cover anything that has anything to do with Indians that Indians are doing. So then we get the Indian media that comes and starts covering it. But for the longest time, and even now, most of the Indian media is completely controlled by AIM. So they're basically putting out AIM-approved stories and not the facts.
Exactly.
So and so, those who turn to the Indian media basically got all the AIM propaganda they could handle. I mean, Dennis Banks has his own, the Native News Online, the guy who owns that is his buddy and will do any story that he wants for him because they're buddies. So, and it's the same with other outlets. They're very controlled and gate kept and will only tell, enough truth to make you think that you got all the information when you really haven't. So.
No, and the beauty of the truth, though, is that despite the media, despite whatever game that is going on in an attempt to try and get the so-called truth out there, the real truth always has the power to get out there, regardless. It cannot be harnessed. People still to this day, when I talk to them and I tell them what happened to my mom, how we found out what happened to my mom, which most people assume the rumors that, we were just repeating a narrative that the FBI hand-fed us to, cause dissension.
We're already
we're out of time.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, and please come back soon.
I will. Take care, Kira.
You too.
We'll talk soon. Okay. Bye.
Bye.